Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, is probably the most underrated sequel right behind Halloween 4, and it's actually one of my favorite sequels. Obviously, it isn't the best of the franchise by not by any means necessary, but it's still a great watch in my opinion. The cinematography, in my opinion, like this whole thing is about my opinion, the cinematography is the best since the original. I don't mind the score, and the Thorn thing I also don't mind. It's a great watch.
Halloween 6, we're not done with you yet. Halloween 6 stars Paul Rudd, Marianne Hagan, Donald Pleasance, and is directed by Joe Chappelle. What's up, guys? This is really for me. This is a treat for myself. Let me explain myself. I started the whole Revisited series with Halloween 6, and I've been going through a lot of these Revisited reviews, and they seem to be getting meatier and longer, and I'm just throwing everything in the kitchen sink in there. And so after I did Halloween 5, I went back and I was like, I'm curious. I don't really watch my past reviews that much. Let's go check out that first Revisited review and, see what it looks like. How's it holding up? So I went back and I took a look at it. And after watching it, I thought, wow, there's still some more things I wanted to say. I wanted to talk about my Drumdums Cut, or what's also known as the Blu Myers Cut on certain forums. There's some more things I wanted to do. And also, I didn't really get to use like video footage in that review because this thing was like 3 years old. Halloween 6 is one of my favorite Halloween movies. So if this is not just any movie to me, this movie is like really important to me. So if this was just like, any old horror movie, then of course I'd leave it be and I wouldn't bother it. But because this is Halloween 6, I feel that I want to take another look at it, maybe dig a little deeper. And like I said, go over my hybrid cut.
This is my last favorite Michael Myers movie. I really enjoy the atmosphere. The look of the mask is my favorite of the Halloween franchise. The music is awesome. Donald Pleasance is awesome as Dr. Loomis for the last time, unfortunately. Paul Rudd is awesome in this movie. It's one of his first movies and the first time I ever seen him. And he fights Michael Myers. Freaking Ant-Man fights Michael Myers. It's awesome. But yeah, I love this movie so much. I love it so much. I got 2 copies of it, and I got the producer's cut. So awesome.
So first thing, let's talk about the backstory of Halloween 6. How did we get from Halloween 5 and then 6 years later finally come out with this movie? Because Halloween 5 came out a year after Halloween 4. So then what was the reasoning for jumping 6 years ahead to finally doing Halloween 6, which would be like the third part of a trilogy? 4, 5, and 6 are affectionately known as the Thorn trilogy, or unofficially. Even though 4 really doesn't talk about the Thorn cult at all. But because you have characters and you have storylines that are, linear throughout that trilogy, it's known as a trilogy. So if we're cutting right to the chase, I think the big reason why studios weren't in a hurry to get Halloween 6 out was because Halloween 5 was ultimately a failure. It, at the time, I think had made like the least amount of money for a Halloween movie. Maybe next only to Halloween 3. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I know it was a bomb, a failure. It wasn't considered to be a good movie. It's not a good movie. There's some fun to be had in it, but if you watch that movie, you realize this was rushed into production. This came out way too quick. And they were competing with themselves on home video, which is also a no-go. They should have at least given this movie like 2 years to breathe. And I think that's the reason why these days, just horror movies in general, you don't really see sequels 1 year after the other. Except for if a story is like planned out in advance for like a certain number of sequels, like say Saw and Paranormal Activity. But, for the big 3, Freddy, Michael, and Jason, we don't really see that anymore. You rarely will ever see, a sequel come out directly the year after a previous movie. And also, Dimension Films bought the rights to the Halloween franchise. And so there was a lot of scrambling to figure out, where do we take this story? We have this Man in Black angle that was just really put there unresponsibly. You know, there was really no end game for that plot line. They just wanted to put something in there to continue the story. But it was irresponsible. They didn't have a full fleshed out story for the Man in Black. So Daniel Farrens, who was a big fan and is a big fan of the franchise, wrote a treatment, wrote his own script. It was an ambitious script. You know, he wanted to answer all the questions that were left unanswered from Part 5. I have not read his original script, but I know it veers more towards the producer's cut, which is that up there. There is the producer's cut. But even the producer's cut isn't like 100% fully Daniel Farrens' vision. But the movie was made, and then there were test screenings, and the test screenings did not go according to plan. They were not successful, and part of the reasons being is because they were shown to, you know, children, 14-year-olds, and you really don't want, you know, a teenager to be the deciding factor on, you know, say Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something like that. Can you imagine if they did that back then? Well, that's what happened to Halloween 6. They did not like the producer's cut. So the filmmakers went back and they made some changes. They filmed a completely different third act, which I do prefer, actually. I will say, I think the ending of the producer's cut, while there was some interesting elements there, it did fit more with the 2/3 that came before it. But ultimately, I found it unsatisfying because of how much control was over the character of Michael Myers. And for a character like Michael Myers, you don't want him to be controlled. It's a mistake. I think they should have found a different way around that. So, the third act, for as crazy as it is in the theatrical cut, my own opinion, I prefer it. I think the Lab Massacre is a nice moment. I think the pipe beat down with Paul Rudd, Tommy Doyle at the end is exciting. I think the cinematography in it is really cool when you got A. Michael Lerner chasing his own father in the tunnel. There's a lot of fun to be had in that theatrical cut third act.
Halloween 6 Curse of Michael Myers is an interesting sequel because on one hand you have some of the best atmosphere, some of the best score, one of the best Myers masks in the movie, some really good kills. On the other hand, you have an incredibly sloppy story. You have two cuts of the movie that both feel incomplete. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the only way that I can actually watch and really enjoy this movie is by watching the Blu Myers Cut made by Lee from Drumdums. Unfortunately, that's not an official cut though,
So now, let's talk about my hybrid cut. I actually did make a hybrid cut a couple years ago, actually. Because, first off, I was getting into video editing. This is when I started thinking about video editing, before I even started my channel. And my first assignment to myself was I'm going to make my own fan edit for Halloween 6, just because the producer's cut and the theatrical cut are so different. And that's what I did, really. I created my own cut because there are things about the producer's cut that I do really like, especially in those first 2/3. There's a lot of great character moments that are left out of the theatrical cut, specifically concerning Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis. There were some nice character moments in there, so I wanted to leave those in there. And so just kind of going down the list of what my changes were, we'll start out with that opening scene. The opening scene where we see Jamie going to have her baby. I preferred the producer's cut. As far as like the mood, as far as like even the music, this is one of the few instances where I kind of preferred the music to this cut than the theatrical cut. I just feel like this scene, it doesn't feel as rushed as the theatrical cut. Now, once we get to Jamie's death in the barn, then I switch it over to the theatrical cut. Because my ending is the theatrical cut. So Jamie is killed in that scene. Whereas in the producer's cut, she's stabbed with a knife and then she's left to be alive. I wanted Jamie's story to just be over. Ultimately, I would have wanted Danielle Harris to come back, reprise her role, possibly make it through the end of this movie, or just have a more integral role with this movie. But we didn't really get that. There was no fixing this problem, so I figured let's just go ahead and have her die as she did in the theatrical cut. Plus, the way she died in this cut, even though some might not prefer it, To me, it fit the tone of this movie. Michael in this movie is more brutal than he has ever been, before or since. This is probably my favorite version of the character. Maybe second only to the first movie. I think George P. Wilbur brought everything to this character that needed to be. I thought this was the scariest version of Michael. I thought this version visually was like the most interesting. And I think Michael Myers, the character, saves Halloween 6, makes Halloween 6 great. You know, if you had Michael Myers from H2O in Halloween 6, then it would have been a complete failure, because Chris Duran is my least favorite Michael Myers. But this Myers, created by George P. Wilbur, I think is excellent. He might be a little big, a little bulky, but you know what? If that Myers is coming at me, I'm getting the hell out of there. As a matter of fact, most, if not all, of the kills in my cut are from the theatrical cut. Just because, A, it's in keeping with the tone of the movie, and B, again, I like my Myers brutal as hell, and that's what you get in the theatrical cut. Which is a nice segue into the music. Another reason why I chose these killings is because the music... Let's talk about the music for a sec. Alan Howarth delivered something different to this movie that worked. And I think every Halloween movie, if it can stand on its own, that's a good thing. And this one had sort of an electric guitar, sort of a rock vibe to it. But it didn't go too crazy with the rock, you know, it suited the scene. I think a score should always suit the scene first and foremost, and then everything after, you know, all the gravy is fine, but it cannot veer away from the scene or what's going on in the scene. And I think that's what happened with this score. I thought...
There's someone in the room. He's right behind you.
This score was completely pulse pounding, and it was so refreshing after the lazy score that we got in Halloween 5. I even have the soundtrack to this score. I play it every year on Halloween, and it's just different. It's fun. It's exhilarating. I don't know, there's just something so unique about it, and I love the score for this movie, especially in the theatrical cut. The producer's cut uses more traditional Halloween elements as far as the score goes. You're gonna hear a lot of cues from the first movie in the producer's cut. And to me, I think it doesn't set this movie apart from the rest as much as the theatrical cut does. But I've already mentioned all the character beats, all the character moments. There are quite a few scenes from the producer's cut that I have wedged back into my cut because I like those added character beats. There's one that I left out, and it's the one where Cara Strode is going into Danny's room, and she's giving him a little nursery rhyme. And I think the producer's cut adds a little bit too much cheese to that scene, so I left that out. But for the most part, all those added extra character beats are still in there if they don't get in the way of the story. The song And Fools Shine On by Brother Kane is one of my favorite 90s rock songs. It's one of those songs that every time I hear it, I think of Halloween 6. Every time I watch Halloween 6, I think of And Fools Shine On. I think those two marry up so well. So I left that scene from the college. When Cara and her friends are walking to school, I left that in there as well from the theatrical cut. I even did a drum cover of that song. If you click on the card right here, you can check it out, and it was a lot of fun. And then lastly, as far as my cut goes, that final act is all theatrical cut. I think I might have wedged just a little bit of something from the final act of the producer's cut in there. But for the most part, it's all theatrical cut. And when all that is together, it makes for the most enjoyable version of the movie. So it's going to be hard for me to even give a rating for this. I'll just give a rating based on the theatrical cut once this review is over. But, you know, I hate to toot my own horn, but when I watch this movie, I watch my cut. I think that's why people make their own cuts of movies. It's not vanity or anything. It's just that's the version of the movie they want to watch. And so that's what I do.
You know, Lee, I'll say this. If they would have released the actual true version of this movie instead of the one that went to theaters, perhaps it wouldn't get some of the hate that it gets, because this movie was so incomplete. I didn't like The Curse of the Thorn. I thought that was a terrible idea. But if they would have shown the actual, the real, what's it called, the production, I think it would have been a better movie.
Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about why I love this movie so much. I think the biggest reason is the atmosphere. Like, just overall, the whole thing. This movie is just completely bathed in atmosphere. It's like the movie was just dipped in this like blue foggy tinge and then pulled right out and then put on celluloid, and it just works so well. And that's a big part of the reason why I watch it so much, is because of just how eerie and creepy it is.
All across the land, huge bonfires were lit. Oh, there was a marvelous celebration. People danced, and they played games, and they dressed up in costumes, hoping to ward off the evil spirits, especially the boogeyman.
A perfect example is that barn scene when we see Jamie's death. And J.C. Brandy took the place of Danielle Harris in this scene. I don't have a problem with J.C. Brandy as an actress. I think she did a great job, actually. But I did not see her as Jamie because Danielle Harris was just so married to that role, you know? And to replace her is like replacing Harrison Ford in the new Han Solo movie, which the new trailer for that just dropped today. I don't really care. I don't want to see anybody else playing Han Solo other than Harrison Ford. But that's another story. But again, I think Danielle Harris should have gotten this role. If you watch those behind the scene documentaries, there's so much great content there to really chew on to give you an understanding of why she didn't get the role and how close she came to having the role. Like, it was pretty much offered to her. And then she got there, she was pretty much treated like nothing. It's a shame. It's really a shame, but she has stated that, you know what, maybe everything happens for a reason. Maybe if she didn't get the role, then we might not have seen her in Rob Zombie's Halloween 1 and 2. And I loved her in both those movies. So I guess, you know, maybe it wasn't a bad thing. But J.C. Brandy did a fine job for what she did. I enjoyed her.
Hey guys, I just want to give you my quick thoughts on one of my personal favorite Halloween movies of the franchise, Halloween 6. What can I say about Halloween 6? It's one of the most foreboding horror movies I've ever seen. I love the atmosphere. George P. Wilbur is scary as hell, and I really do dig Paul Rudd's performance. For his first movie, he definitely did a good job, so those are my quick thoughts on Halloween 6.
Now, I love the kills in Halloween 6. If I do a Halloween 6 review, I have to talk about how awesome the kills are. There's so many great ones. The first one that I like talking about is when Myers is about to leave Smith's Grove Sanitarium. He picks the nurse up by her face and then slams it onto this wall spike. And it's one of my favorite kills in the franchise just because of how creepy it is. As soon as he does it, he does his Myers thing. He just like looks at her. And, you know, it's a great way to set up the movie. And it's a great way to set up how dangerous he is. You know, he's completely insane, completely crazy. There's no, like, remorse. He's like the Terminator, really. He doesn't give two craps. All he wants to do is get to his target and kill it. And his target in this movie was Jamie's baby, after Jamie. And then you have the Strode family. Deborah and John Strode, who were affectionately named after John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. This family is interesting because Deborah is really just, you know, you feel so bad for her. You know, she's treated like crap by her husband. And so John Strode is like the biggest dick I have ever seen.
I see only one bastard in this house.
Get away from her.
You shut up and stay out of it.
Kill for him.
Please don't.
You ever talk to me like that again, and so help me God.
Huge kudos to Bradford English, who created like one of the most memorable assholes in like horror history.
Enough! This Michael Myers bullshit!
You just can't help but love hating this guy, and I think that's what the best villains do. You love to hate them. You know, you don't hate to see them on the screen. You're happy when they die, but they create an entertaining scene, and that's what Bradford English did. And once he gets killed by Myers, which is a great kill, by the way, it's like Myers takes his time killing his victims. It's like the closest thing to torture, really. But this guy deserved it more than anything. And everybody loves when you're watching a horror movie and then there's a kill that plays out that you just can't help but love. Like, I'm so glad that dude got it, because he deserved it. And John Strode definitely deserved it. And really, one of my favorite kills in the movie is the Laboratory Massacre in the third act. That scene is just completely insane. A. Michael Lerner actually played Myers in that scene. George P. Wilbur, for whatever reason, was not brought back to play Myers, but he's still in that actual scene. He's one of the doctors that's actually getting massacred by Myers. But I remember watching this scene in the theater and never seeing Myers killed like this before. Just a complete massacre. And it was pretty damn freaky sitting in the theater watching this. Now let's talk about Wynn. Wynn is a character that I find very interesting. And if you remember in the first movie, Wynn is introduced. I'm glad that they brought Wynn into the story because, you know, we're on the 6th movie here. So let's throw some meat into the story and maybe go down some different roads. And the one mistake they did make in this is trying to tell a little bit too much of Myers' past and why he is the way he is. You don't need to know that. But I do like that Wynn is there trying to harness Myers' power, trying to control him. And I think the big lesson in there, and that we learn in the theatrical cut, is that you can't control Michael. And if you try to control Michael, eventually you're going to be dead. It also gives Loomis something nice to play off of, story-wise. You know, throughout the movie, there's all these moments where Loomis and Wynn are just constantly battling each other. Ultimately, they're friends. Like at the beginning of the movie, they're friends. And then Loomis finds out the truth about Wynn. I was digging that story, really. And which brings me to Donald Pleasance. This was his last role. There is kind of a sadness to this movie when I watch it because I know that Donald died in the middle of this movie. And you know what? This was the 6th movie in a franchise, but Donald Pleasance loved this character, loved this franchise so much, and he is just sorely missed. Like, if I could give anything, if I could have one character back, it wouldn't be Laurie Strode, it would be Loomis. It would be Donald Pleasance. I miss him terribly still. And there's just something so eerie about that last scene when he's talking to Tommy Doyle and he's stating that he has to go back in because he has some unfinished business. And there's more going on, I think, with Donald Pleasance and the audience in that scene than what's actually playing out in the movie. Because we, as the viewer, we know that this is it. This is the last time we're going to see Donald Pleasance on screen. And so that sadness really just resonates throughout the end of this movie. And then to hear him scream at the end, I prefer the theatrical cut. I prefer to not see Donald Pleasance screaming, even though in the producer's cut they show him screaming. I like that the last thing you see is Myers' mask on the ground and Loomis screaming. When I got up from the theater, I felt a sadness, you know, because that was the last time we were gonna hear Loomis. The last thing of Loomis is not visually, it's audibly, which makes it even a little sadder. But I think there is a legacy to Halloween 6. I think people are still talking about this movie. It's funny that when H2O came out, everybody praised H2O as, like, you know, the best Halloween movie, you know, since the first couple. And Don't get me wrong, Halloween H2O is a good movie. But what I'm talking about is like the perception over time. It seems like, ironically, the Thorn cult that Halloween 6 so prominently boasts, the movie itself is becoming kind of a cult. It does have a cult following now. And it is one of those movies that I watch more than any other Halloween movie for some reason. I like Halloween 4 a little bit better than Halloween 6, but I probably watch 6 more than I do 4. Maybe even more than the original. It's just one of those that I just constantly find myself throwing in. It's one of those that I can just like throw in the background and just, you know, I can be doing it, I can be cooking and I'll throw Halloween 6 in. I'll let it play in the background. And I love that about this movie. So, it's hard for me to give a rating for a movie that I hold near and dear to my heart so much. For me, it's Trapped on an Island. But as a movie itself, you know, I will definitely give it a purchase worthy. It's one of the last great Halloween movies in my mind.
So a 30-second video on Halloween 6 from Bronco Juggalo. That's a tall order. Jamie is grown up, she's pregnant. Michael goes after the baby. Michael tries to get the baby from Tommy Doyle, who saved the baby, played by Paul Rudd. Dr. Loomis's last appearance because of the unfortunate death of Donald Pleasance. It's an awesome movie. Love the movie. Highly underrated. Go see it. Check it out. Bye.
So anyway, guys, this was a nice, long, chunky revisited. Finally, I got Halloween 6 out of my system. I've done so many videos on this. I've done a Drumdums Watches on this. But, you know, I get so many views out of talking about this movie for some reason. People constantly gravitate towards Halloween 6. And I think that says something about the movie. So, anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on Halloween 6? Looking forward to hearing them. I can't believe I got through this whole thing. Anyway, guys, come over to Killer Flicks. Check out my Killer Flicks t-shirt. If you want one, go to the Drumdums store, get you a Killer Flicks t-shirt. But become a member of Killer Flicks if you haven't. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and now Stardust. And thank you to some of the Stardust users who I sprinkled throughout this. If you like what I'm doing, hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. And Drumdum out.